So hi, everybody. Hi to everybody watching this too, both live and if you're watching after the fact. So I'm super privileged and excited today to be talking to Alaina Talboy, who is a design researcher at Microsoft. And I meet so many cool PhDs with so many cool jobs, but I have to say that there's a few of those companies that we hear and we're just like, ooh, like PhDs can work there. That's really neat. And I think Microsoft is definitely one of those because it's just one of those brands that we engage with so much. And so I'm really super excited to have a conversation with you. We met, first of all, on Twitter. As far as I recall, because I know we had engaged a little bit and we added each other on LinkedIn and we kind of chatted a little bit. And I had appreciated, you shared a post a while back on like transferring your skills out of academia into a resume. And I thought it was a really fantastic guide. I know you posted it in the community. And also I should make sure I'll make sure I share that with like the show notes or whatever, like in the comments of this, because it's really a fantastic post. And so I really like, we hit it off, I think also because you also have a passion for helping PhDs make that connection. And I've seen that in your tweets and in the posts you're making. And I just read, just this morning, I was reading your article about the one you just posted about like working remotely in Zoom calls. It's sort of ironic based on like the conversation we're having right now, that it's yet one more Zoom call, but hopefully it'll be interesting and a good conversation. I know what you mean though. We've talked a bit about it in the community too. Like sometimes at the end of the day, it's just like one more Zoom call is just not really what you want. But anyways, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us today. And both here and as it lives in the community, I know this conversation is going to be super helpful to people. So I want to get started. I'm hoping we can kind of be a little more open-ended, just have a conversation. To begin with, I was going to ask you a few prompting questions and then as we go, I'll have some more. So basically you and I can talk for the first, however long it takes. I'm guessing it'll maybe half an hour, 40 minutes. Depending, no pressure. We'll just kind of see where it goes. But, and then I want to make sure I save some time for people who are watching to be able to ask questions too. So, so we'll do that at the end. So if you're watching, you can either type questions into the Q&A box or you can type it into the chat as well. So, so why don't we get started? So first of all, would you mind like tell us a little bit about your journey, like maybe start with you in academia, because that's kind of where we all start, right? Is like academics and try to figure out where the heck we go from here and how do we turn it into. So where did it start for you?
It definitely started in academics, and that was 9 years ago at this point that I started my graduate journey. Wow. So I am actually one of the few people that goes for a master's degree first and then transfers somewhere else for a PhD, which is not the most common route to take. But, in psychology, there's so many different fields that you can go into. There's, IO psychology, cognitive psychology, where I ended up. There's counseling. There's all these other places. And so I wanted to make sure I was picking the path I actually wanted to go down. So I did my master's. I finished it up in 2 years from the University of West Florida. And then I got accepted to the University of South Florida in the Cognitive Neuroscience and Psychology track. And so I spent 5 years, 6, over at USF, did my PhD, and then it was literally a week after I had defended my dissertation, I got an offer to come to Microsoft.
Wow.
Packed up, and here I am.
That's amazing. You didn't even have like the downtime that a lot of us do have in between PhD and the...
No, and this is something I think the best piece of advice I ever had going into academia was from my first advisor, who said, hey, treat this like your job. Like at the end of this master's degree, you should have 2 publications, one for every year you're in grad school. Wow. And if you can't do that, you shouldn't be looking at tenure track positions. And I took that advice to heart. And I graduated with 9 publications.
Wow.
Which is a really high number. Yeah. But this was something I was really passionate about. This was my career. And I wanted to do everything possible to make sure I'd have opportunities on the other end of it.
Absolutely. That's a great way to look at it. And it's interesting that your supervisor was so pivotal in that, because so many supervisors don't have these conversations about even about academic roles, but definitely not about non-academic roles, right?
Absolutely not. I was very fortunate with my first advisor for my master's degree because he was actually in biopharmacology.
Okay.
So the fact that he was in the psychology department was an interesting twist, and not your typical situation. But I think in the, you want to say harder sciences of like biochem and engineering and things like that, it's very much you have to prove your value outside to industry. And so bringing that into the academic space is really, it's the same conversation. You have to prove your value.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So were you thinking industry right from the beginning, or were you kind of interested in the academic route, or?
It's funny. I went back and forth myself many times. And in the end, I had actually decided on academia.
Yeah.
And I had interviewed at a bunch of different universities for tenure positions. And it was really the interview at Rutgers that was like, oh, no, I could have my own lab. I could be doing research all day. I would only teach one class a semester and things. But in the end, the offer that I got did not match that, aspirational tenure track dream. And so I ended up having to turn it down and switch gears.
Good for you. That's awesome. Awesome, but you know what I mean? It's
yeah. At the time it was heartbreaking, and it broke my heart, because when you leave academia, you can't go back.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the hardest part that academics have to really fight through is, shutting that door and accepting that that's not your future path that you trained for 8 years.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a loss of identity. And I think it's interesting too, like I've talked to people who have left at different stages in the degree. And I never had a tenure track job offer. I didn't have an on-campus interview. I didn't play the game for that long. Like I left pretty quick, but I did try. Like I did send out a bunch of applications. And I talked to people in my shoes who kind of did that and just never even got a sniff of an academic job. And they feel like failures because they weren't even good enough to get that sniff, like that interest.
Oh, and that's just so heartbreaking. Like, I just want to hug them, be like, no, it's not you. It's a flooded market with a broken system. It's not you.
I know. And then it right up to people who have turned down tenure track jobs, and even people who have left tenure track jobs and said, like, we got the dream job, and everybody around them was saying, like, you should be happy. This is exactly what everyone wants. Yep. And realizing that it's not all it's cracked up to be. So
it's not. Yeah.
So how did Microsoft enter the equation? Like, was it something you had been looking at for a long time, or was it sort of just out of the blue?
It's interesting. So the tenure offer I got was in Alabama, and I was actually on the second site visit, deciding how to lay out the lab, how it would look, what equipment it would have. I was doing that whole meeting and actually getting into conversations about how much money I would need for startup funds to do that. And I woke up in the middle of the night and on the last day of that trip, and was just like, I can't see myself living here. I can't see myself in this group. I can't, visualizing that and the future it would have for my family living there was not congruent with what I thought. So actually it was 3:00 in the morning. I hopped on LinkedIn and started applying. And I think I applied to 20 jobs or something like that before my partner woke up. It was come back to bed, And I had sent off that resume that I had posted in the thread on the Mighty Networks that you set up.
Yeah.
And it was 2 days later that I got the job offer.
Oh my gosh. That's that's a really unique alt-tech story. I don't hear a lot like that.
It is.
And you got an offer 2 days later. It wasn't even a call for an interview or anything.
No, well, so it was an interview with an offer at the end of the interview.
Okay.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's so neat. And good for you to have the clarity of mind to be in the place and just acknowledge that what you're feeling is this isn't right, on some level, right? That's really interesting.
It was hard. I had ignored those feelings because I was up there for 4 days. And it was after I went to bed the third night, I woke up and was just, no, I can't do it.
Wow.
And that was only 3 days. And so sometimes you just know and you don't want to acknowledge it, but eventually you kind of have to. So.
I like the courage though. Like, I mean, that it takes tremendous courage to walk away like that, because there are people who would say to themselves, like, this is what I want, you know, or would rationalize it or say, well, I'm going to try it or whatever. And then they wake up 10 years later in a job that they hate. And to have the guts to walk away, like right from the get-go, that's really impressive.
Yeah, thank you. It was terrifying because I didn't have a different job lined up yet, but like, sometimes you just know. You get it.
That's honestly one of like the best leaving academia stories I've ever heard. I have to say, and I hadn't heard it in its entirety. I knew you got to Microsoft somehow, but I didn't know you got there. So
yeah, it was very, very fast paced. I defended my dissertation March 1st. And I had the offer, I believe it was the 10th or something like that.
Wow.
And then I moved and I started Microsoft April 1st. And so I literally had about 10 days to pack up my entire house. And I drove from Florida all the way up here. So it's like the two farthest points you can get in the US.
Yeah, exactly. Diagonal opposite, right? And opposite weather too, I imagine.
Oh, it's gorgeous. I have the windows open. I have fresh air coming in.
Yeah, that's cool. I've never been to Seattle, so I have to check it out someday.
It's wonderful.
That's cool. Okay, so I want to ask, this is a question that I'm sure a lot of people are thinking. What the heck is user research, or what the heck is UX research? It's something we're seeing thrown around a lot. And especially, like, I have to say, because my background was in the humanities, and I did a little bit of anthropology in my PhD, just kind of theoretical stuff. But I started looking for careers for like humanities anthropologists. And even in the humanities, people were saying you can get this cool tech job called UX. It's like, what the heck is UX? Like, so tell us about like your experience with it. And
yeah, so I will tell you, I have been in this role for just over a year now. So a year and like 2 months. I still wake up every day excited to go to work.
That's so
cool.
I
think that is so cool. And part of the reason is because UX is such a broad field that you can do so much. So in my role, user experience is figuring out, what do the users want? What do they need? How can we give them stuff that helps them do whatever it is they want to do faster, easier, simpler, anything like that. And so as a researcher, I help all the way from foundational research, like looking at how do people communicate virtually. And then we follow users and create what's called a journey map. And it's literally a step-by-step process of how you get from A to B using technology, because that's my current field. And then we go and we take that information, we analyze all of the data that we get back, asking about user journeys and how they get through different processes. We distill that down for our research partners who are like project managers or developers or engineers. And we sit down and ideate a solution together. And so research is involved all the way from foundation to creating new solutions, to testing those solutions, iterating on them, and also following up afterwards and being like, okay, we got this great solution now. How does it work? How can we make it even better? And so user research is literally the end-to-end research line that goes hand in hand with all of developing and engineering.
That's really cool. And are you working more on like software, or is there a specific product you work on, or just anything that needs to be done? Or
so I work on the Edge browser, and a plug, if you haven't used the new Edge browser, try it out.
Okay, I'll have to try it. I have to be honest, I'm a Firefox guy, but I'll have to I will give it a try, because I know somebody on the inside at Microsoft. I will give it a try.
It's great, actually. The new browser, it has the new logo, it has a bunch of new features, it's built on the new Chromium engine. And so there's a lot of work and a lot of people that poured their heart into this product. And it is just such an honor to be a part of it and to be the voice of the customer in that entire process. The core skills that I bring to this role that's not typical in user experience is that I'm a quant person. So I do statistics and numbers and all the things that most people hate to do.
Yeah.
The UX field is typically people who use qualitative methods and, interviews and stuff like that. And so if you can bring just something slightly different, that's always a great way to get your foot in the door. So.
That's really cool. I had, I should tell you, I was a policy analyst for the federal government in Canada. And I got a short, 2-week stint that I got assigned to a user experience project. And it was an ideation project. So they basically, I went from my cubicle in a tower, which was awful. And they rented this space above a coffee shop with beautiful hardwood floors and a fireplace and big windows. And we went and spent 2 weeks there. And by the end of it, I was like, if I were to stay in government, I should be doing UX. It was so much fun. It was really neat.
So much fun. And I just got out of a 3-week co-design sprint where we brought customers in from Paris, virtually, for 3 weeks. And we talked to them and created solutions together. So you can actually bring your customers into that journey with you. And it's just so much fun.
That's what it was people using the refugee program, and we're looking at these roadblocks people have and how can we fix them. And then one of the things I loved is the creativity that comes into it, to just be the sky's the limit. We can suggest, it may not all go, but we could have suggested anything. And it's what could we do for this? And we came up with some really neat stuff.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I take it that doing you have the creativity kind of too, and the ability to brainstorm and do all that neat sort of iterative thinking.
It is. Yeah. It's great. I think if I consider the core components of my job, talking to customers and getting their insights is probably the best part of my day.
That's cool.
And part of that is because I get to tell them hey, I'm just the researcher. If you don't like it, tell me so we can fix it.
Yeah.
And I'm a kind of person that I like to help people fix things.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I get so much value out of my current role. And also because I love statistics. So.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I'm not really a numbers guy. So I can appreciate that you could bring that side of the thing to the UX experience. Would be really good. So
yeah. If anyone's looking at UX, you don't have to love numbers to do it.
No, of course. Yeah.
You have to have really solid research skills and the ability to take scientific mumbo jumbo and present it in ways that everyone can get. Yeah. So whether you're talking to developers or customers or other researchers, you got to be able to change that level that you're presenting at.
It's really interesting. And even at the level of getting jobs for PhDs, one of the things routinely I see is the ability to present, even you have that conceptual level that you can present concepts to people, but even at the level of presenting yourself to people as a PhD, I find that PhDs are intelligent, we know this, but one of the hardest boundaries I think that we cross sometimes is recognizing that people know that we're intelligent and they're more interested to see that we can actually relate to people. And it's interesting, that's kind of a job search problem, but it's also a workplace problem too, right? That you need to take the big brain up here and make it relevant to people and help explain concepts to people.
Yeah. I think the thing that helped me the most with that is that you can tell I get really excited. I talk with my hands. I'm very animated. But something I've gotten consistently in my feedback across this last year is that when you are so excited and you are so energized about what you're talking about, it's very easy to bring people along that conversation with you. Yeah. And so my advice there would just be any interview you get, any kind of interaction that you have, just try to bring that excitement. And I hate the following advice and I'm sorry, but smile.
Yeah, I know. So tell me about what your day-to-day would look like. You're working for this huge company. It's what's a typical day at Microsoft for you? I know that all around the world, people have very different experiences at Microsoft, but what does it look like for you?
For me, so, day to day. So it takes on many different shapes. So I can give you an overview of what a quarter looks like.
Sure, yeah.
Because that's usually where I do my research planning, is I create a program to span those 3 months, because we have topics that shift every single month almost. And so I could have a day where one day I'm just answering emails and fielding research requests and talking to people about the research programs that we offer, what kind of research is needed depending on what the partner's questions are. So that's a lot of supporting my partner teams and helping them figure out exactly where to go and where to get the kind of feedback that's most appropriate for what they want. The second is obviously running research. So I do have support staff that I assign out different research tasks. They could either be running the study for me, or they could be analyzing the data, or maybe writing up the final report. The research design and process is all part of my role. So a good portion of my day is setting up specific research plans and figuring out the best way to tackle an issue. And then I also do my department-wide support. So one of the things in my role is that I'm one of the only quantitative focused people in the department. And so people who haven't run basic statistics before might need a little bit more hand-holding and help guiding them through how to do those things. Or if they have a study where they need really heavy quant analysis, I would usually step in and help provide that analysis for them. Oh, wow. So I have several different moving pieces in my current role that it just, depending on the day, I might be in support for one day, I might be running another day, I might be fielding another day.
Oh, sorry, you just saw the top of my daughter's head come in there, but slight distraction, but now you might hear her crying in the background.
It happens. You're not alone.
This is the thing about this time in the world is that, like, I was just talking to a friend of mine and he was saying, even he's talking to like senior people in government, and all of a sudden they're like in their bedroom with their kids walking in, and it kind of has a humanizing effect when like even these senior untouchable people are just kind of hanging out in their office or at home or whatever.
Yep. So. It was great. I was presenting research on some of the work-life balance issues that information workers and knowledge workers have been having during this time. Yeah. And in the middle of that presentation to my senior leadership, my son came in and was like, I have a problem, I need you now. And like, I had to get up and leave the meeting. Was
really?
But I had to get up and go fix it. And when I came back, I caught the tail end from one of my primary partners that was like, oh, I guess this is a really good way to demonstrate this particular finding. You get distracted by your kids.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love it. Okay, so I want to come back to the question of, so we were talking about your day-to-day. That's really interesting. And I think it's also one of the things that I love about what I'm hearing you saying is, it's almost nice. Well, it depends what some people like a day-to-day routine that's the same, but some people, and I'm one of these people, like when I do the same thing every day, I start to lose it a little bit. Yes. So I love the change of pace and like different challenges. Yeah.
To me, it's having something at a different stage that if my brain is like, I can't deal with heavy, deep numbers right now, I can go do a more lightweight, like clear out my emails or answer research requests or something like that. So I always love having that mixture of things in different stages. And I think that is actually a skill that came out of academia, was because you always have papers at different stages and you always have research running pretty much nonstop year round. Yeah. So that project management, that task management is really just so vital to everything a researcher does in the industry.
Yeah. And this is a really good segue into, first of all, what your blog was about, but what I know you've been really passionate about is the subject of like how to translate those academic skills into a job. Could you tell us a little bit about like some of kind of your philosophies about how to do that sort of, I'm calling it translation. I think it's probably the best way to say it, but.
I think I called it translation because it's really, it is you're taking everything that's presented in one language and you're literally translating it to an entirely different language. Yeah. As an academic, we talk about research programs spanning 5 years, whereas in industry, we talk about research programs for 3 months, We talk about project management in industry and all the moving pieces that go in a project. In academia, we never talk about it that way, but it's literally what you're doing. You're managing a lab of researchers. You're managing research lines that are in different places with different tangibles expected at the end of it. You have presentations, you have teaching, you have mentoring, you have volunteer work, you have all these things in academia, and you do it all the time. And so it's one of these things where you're kind of stuck down in the mud of it when you're still in academia. And so it's really hard to step back and see, like, if I listed out my exact day-to-day in academia, I'd fill up 3 or 4 pages of stuff. And every academic I've talked to says the same thing. And so it's a matter of literally translating those 3 or 4 pages of what you do into terms that hiring managers are going to understand and see the value in. Yep. And I think that was the point I was trying to get across in that article, is that academics have so many skills, so many. And I know a lot of them are soft skills, but they are so needed in industry. And they really do make up the kind of crunch of what you're doing.
And I love the, like, one of the things that I often tell people, because what I saw, what you said, is that, like, everything you need is on your CV basically, but it's about how you present it. And it's a challenge. Like, I think, well, actually, sorry, let me pose this as a question rather than an opinion, but, like, is there something you, both in going through the process, and now I'm assuming you're seeing resumes too on a regular basis. Yes, you said that in a post. What kind of thoughts do you have about translating a CV? Like, what advice would you give to somebody other than what we just talked about on translating skills? But is there any specific kind of things you see, or?
Start sooner than you think you need it.
That's good.
So my CV was close to, I believe, 9 or 10 pages long with because, as a grad student, you kind of throw everything in the kitchen sink in there, right? So you have all of the stuff you taught, you have all the research lines, you have all the awards, presentations, paper, you have everything in this document. In industry, it's not so much, hiring managers don't care about what you did. They care about how you can use that to make their company better. Yeah. And I think that's the piece that gets lost in translation a lot of the times, is that, we are so used in academia to being retrospective and saying, like, here's all these great things I've done in the past. We use that for our hiring decisions. We use that for our promotion decisions. And everything you've done is kind of like the breadcrumbs of your impact. But in industry, they don't really see it that way. They see, okay, great, you did all this stuff. How is that going to help me? How is that going to help my company? And so if you want to think about academia taking a more retrospective look at what you've done, industry is a more proactive look at, how is this going to benefit my company? And so when you're writing cover letters, when you're writing CVs, literally every single line in those documents should demonstrate something of value to the company that you're applying to.
Yeah. And so it's hard to condense that, those 9 pages into a 1 or 2 page resume.
It's hard. It's painful because, like, you want to hold on to that achievement for dear life, but, like, is getting an award for teaching really going to help you in a role that you're not teaching?
Exactly. Yeah. It's almost like, I remember we had a saying in writing, it was kill your darlings. That, like, often when you're writing something, you really love the way you've said something, but sometimes you just need to kill it. And I kind of think the same thing applies for, like, a CV to a resume, is, like, sometimes you just got to let it go. Like, it's not relevant.
If it makes you feel better, I have a separate document that was my delete document, and I just pushed everything over there. So I wasn't actually deleting it. I was just moving it for later. And so
that's good. That's a good, like, psychological shift. Yeah, that's funny. One of the things I see a lot too, and I said it in the resume thing last week, which I'll post a video in the community. But one of the things, ironically, that I see is the stuff that's prized in academia is often the exact stuff that's not as relevant outside of academia. And the stuff, like the service stuff that PhDs do in academia, is often the most relevant. So, like, it's in the service, not for everybody, but in the service, especially for people like me with a humanities degree, that's where people, like, run projects and do conferences and, like, do stakeholder relations and edit a book, and it's all that sort of thing. But I don't always, and then I'll look at the top, and the stuff they want to emphasize are these, like, 3 publications that are totally obscure and don't mean anything, right? Like, so it's.
Yeah.
Anyway.
For me, I had a couple different versions of the resume, and the job that I got, the resume that I used was focused on how I can translate concepts to different levels and to different types of people. And so part of my research in academia was literally translating numbers for lay audiences to understand. And that's a really hard thing people can't really wrap their brain around sometimes. And so I had different versions of my resume. That one was focused towards communication and those skills. And like it still lists out my research skills and things like that, but the focus was very different. Yeah. I've applied to government positions where I would focus more on the nitty gritty of like, here's the technical achievements that I have. Here's the technical skill sets that I bring to the role. And so I think also keeping in mind that you might need to tailor and have different versions of your resume available depending on what you're looking to apply to.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point. So would you say like the people you're working with, like, is it more common at, I know you can't speak for all of Microsoft, but so I often tell people to network, and often I find it is the best way to get into positions. There are exceptions, and I think a lot of the times the exceptions are the big companies with really strict kind of HR practices, that it's not the case that a manager can just give out a job like that. Is that kind of the case with Microsoft, or do you see a mixture of people coming in from different ways, like networking and resume, like applying for jobs, or like what do you see?
I see it multiple ways. The way I started at Microsoft was as a vendor, which is not as a full-time employee. So I was contracted to work for Microsoft. I've also seen people go through, careers.microsoft.com and get hired through that way. I've seen referrals working. We also have internship programs, and we see that if an intern demonstrates a lot of really great value, they do get invited back. Yeah. And so I think technology has more ways and paths that you can take than maybe other industries might not have.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it also goes to show you that, like, kind of like you said before with the resumes, I mean, like, people are looking for somebody who can solve your problem. And I know even like I actually need to hire some people for stuff that I'm doing now. And it's like, it's not like I don't really care about how I find them. If they sent me a resume or if somebody introduced me to them, I don't really care, as long as I know that I can trust them to do the work and that they're going to deliver and not be too expensive.
Yeah. And how do you know you can trust them to do the work? It's the resume and the cover letter. That's what
it can be
going to sell you.
Yeah, exactly. So would you say like to somebody thinking of going to work for like a big tech company, and I know you don't speak for all of them, but what kind of advice would you give them for like their next steps if they're in a PhD? Like what would you tell them?
So I would tell them to start really critically thinking about what skill set they could be bringing to their future company. And so if they're still in their PhD, this is the perfect time to do this. If they just finished the PhD, they might want to work through this process a little bit quicker. But really sitting down with your CV, having that, 3 or 4 page outline of what you do in your day-to-day, and then sitting down with a couple of job descriptions for potential careers that you want. So whether you're user research or policy or whatever branch you want to go in, pull a couple example job descriptions. And you don't necessarily have to apply to those, but what you're doing with those job descriptions is figuring out how they are presenting the language and what terms they're using to talk about these concepts. And then literally go through line by line, translate through, take like a week to figure it out and make sure you're really succinctly, keyword succinctly, summarizing all of those great things you accomplished in your academic tenure. And then when I started my resume, I started with 3 or 4 pages and then took a day off from it, came back, cut out a page, took off, came back, go through the process of revise and resubmit for yourself, be your own reviewer too, essentially, is like, does this achievement really add value to whatever company I'm applying to? If not, move it to that other file. Don't necessarily delete it, because I know we hold on to our achievements with a death grip. But try to get your resume down to that really clear, succinct 1 or 2 page document.
That's awesome. That's really good advice. What was I going to say? I just forgot. I lost my train of thought. But yeah, that's really fantastic. Oh, what I was going to say is I love the starting with job postings. It's such a good way to think about it, and that's kind of the way I like to think about it too. And one of the other things I think, and it's the reason why I want to tell people this more, is because if you start early enough, you can actually look at those job postings and design your degree with those in mind and say like, okay, if I want this job, I'm going to need experience managing a budget or doing project management. And then you say, okay, like how can I build that into my degree?
And you know where you get all that? If you've ever submitted a grant application, you have finance experience, you have project management experience, you have forecasting experience, because most people don't think of grant applications as forecasting, but that's exactly what they're supposed to be.
Yeah, that's really good.
You have all that.
Yeah, I never thought of that, like grant applications as forecasting, but that's a really good way to put it. Yeah. That's really cool. Well, so this is really awesome. And I think I'm going to turn to the questions now. If that's okay. And then we'll kind of wrap up in a minute, but let me just go. I see there's a couple of things in the Q&A. So we had a question about how does the day-to-day of the job look like, but we did, you did answer that already.
Yep. Lots of meetings, lots and lots of meetings. I didn't forget that part. I would say I spend probably close to half my week in meetings, either educating partners about research programs or things like that, or wrapping up different projects or doing check-ins on projects. So lots of meetings.
Sometimes meetings when it could be emails. You don't have to say anything for that.
I might have written a paper on this.
Yeah. It's just corporate life though. It's funny the way things get structured. But one of the things I actually think is really interesting about the pandemic is that it's accelerating this kind of the future of work stuff.
It is.
That, like, when I first got hired, my first job was a company with very like 1990s corporate culture. And a lot of these places are just getting thrown full tilt into, this is what the world looks like now, figure it out. And with some positive and some negative repercussions, I'm sure. But I want to ask you, so this is a good question. I think you kind of answered some of this, but and to those of you watching, feel free to type in more questions if you have any more. So what from Alaina's resume made it interesting to hiring managers? I think you maybe touched on that a little bit, but could you kind of reiterate it one more time?
Yeah, no. So it's interesting. I did ask my manager this in my 1-year evaluation because I was curious why she hired me. It was actually the skill set that I have. So in my resume, I have a small section that just summarizes like my core skills. And in that section, I listed out a couple things like SPSS or R or SAS, like, the technical programs that we use for data analysis. But I also listed those soft skills of project management and team management and things like that. And she said it was that section of my resume that actually got me hired.
Really? That's so interesting.
It is. I was really surprised by that because that was, I think in the end, I spent the most mental time trying to figure out how to format that section, but it took me like 2 minutes to actually write that one.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I often think of that as like a throwaway section. Like you have to have a skills section, but do a lot of work on your experiences or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
So at the top of it, I have my summary essentially, which is my 3 bullet points from the top of my LinkedIn. And I can't remember what it says. It says something like an experienced user researcher with expertise in blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And then those expertise areas are almost duplicated, but they're talked about in slightly different terms in that skill set section. And part of that is because I had actually learned, I can't remember where I learned it, but automated reviews of resumes might be looking for a specific keyword and it might be called 4 different things. And so having those 4 different things referenced throughout your resume is more likely to get picked up by the automated system.
There are actually websites you can go to, and you can copy and paste the job posting and copy and paste your resume, and it will do the AI whatever, like cross examination, and see if the keywords match, and be like, actually you're missing these 5 keywords, you should add them. So I don't know if I ever told people.
Send me that link, because that would have been really useful a year ago.
Yeah, let me make a note of that. For keywords. And I do think, from my recollection, I haven't used them in like a year now because I haven't thought much about this, but I think it was like a freemium thing. So you might have got to do it like once or twice and then you had to pay. But yeah, it can be, it's very interesting. And I remember plugging my resume in and seeing like I had none of the skill words, and it was especially like some job postings are just like so many words, and so like I like a nice clean job posting too, but that's a different story.
I don't really read job postings in detail. I skip down to the requirements.
Yeah.
I go through the requirement list, and then right before I submit, I'll go back and read like the paragraphs of whatever, but I'm probably don't follow that advice. That's probably not the best advice.
That's funny. Well, I wouldn't have great advice either, because my jobs come from networking. So yeah, so your advice is much better than mine on this. So that's good. So I want to ask about confidence, because it's something that's really like as you're telling us, I can imagine there might be somebody watching this being like you just went and said, like, I haven't experienced this and that. And, you know, one of the things I find with PhDs is a lot of people are so hesitant to step out and say, yes, I can do this. And, you know, it's something like coming off of 5 years of imposter syndrome, and sometimes like actual like psychological abuse. And there's just so much crap PhDs go through, and they feel so worthless. And it's so hard to just flip that switch and go to an employer and say, yes, I'm the person who can solve your problems.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I was going to ask if you have any advice for somebody like that, or like, what would you think about it?
So I actually wrote an article about a year before I graduated about how I deal with imposter syndrome. And I know it doesn't seem like it, but I do. I have some serious imposter syndrome, and like all week leading up to this conversation was like, is it really going to be valuable for people? People don't do what I do. They're not going to care. And like I have all of that imposter stuff in my head, and I sympathize so much, because it sucks and it's hard to get over. And really, I wish I had. I don't know how I deal with it. I try to think of it in terms of like, I'm going in and I'm about to teach a lecture. And so this is for me to pass on my experience, and hopefully maybe it'll help someone, but really I'm taking the expectation off of myself that this is going to help anyone.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of deal with it. And I just hope that it might help someone. And I try not to think about the other stuff.
That's interesting.
As far as building confidence goes, really, I'd have to say it's seeing the impact of my work at my job, and seeing the things that have changed because of it have really helped build my confidence. And I think that's something that we miss a lot in academia, because it can be years to see the impact of your work. And I think there has to be some kind of mental shift for each person, and each person is going to have to figure out their own way to do this. But if you publish an article, hell yes, take that time off and celebrate. Go have a drink with dinner, be wild, whatever it is you do. You know, go to bed earlier, sleep in later, whatever.
That sounds nice.
But, you know, just make sure you are rewarding yourself for each and every little piece that you accomplish that was hard won, or even mediocrely won, or whatever happens to be the case. But celebrate your achievements, and that'll slowly help you build up your confidence. Hopefully.
That's awesome. It's funny because I was having the same, a similar conversation 2 weeks ago with the 2 policy analysts in the community. So we were talking about careers and policy analysis. And one of the things that I was saying after the fact to both of them was there's kind of this curse of knowledge thing too, that like once you know something, and especially like even in the alt-ac world, like once you go, I meet so many PhDs who are doing amazing things, but they don't stop to think this is really amazing. They just think, you know, whatever, I get up in the morning and drink my coffee and go to work, and it's a job, right? And it's like, holy crap, you know, how many PhDs like dream of having a really great high paying job that they love. And it's just, but people don't always make that connection, that even just, and it's why like these conversations, even like at their most informal, and this has been super valuable, and you're so thoughtful in the way that you give like the responses and how you've thought through like how to actually connect your PhD experience. But even at the most informal level, just for people watching, just to hear somebody tell their story of how that transition worked, and not even the information alone, it's also just like the mental leap, like to hear you say like, yes, I felt like an imposter too, right? Like, you're not alone. Like we all feel like that. Like, it's that's really powerful.
Okay.
So well, thank you so much. I don't think there's any other questions. I'm just going to have one last quick look, but this was just really awesome. I really enjoy, first of all, it was so nice to meet you like virtually face to face, but
very nice.
It's really nice to have a conversation, and maybe sometime we'll meet in person and do this in person after all this terrible pandemic is over.
Absolutely. Come out and see Seattle. We'll go get a cup of coffee.
Yes, I've heard the coffee is fantastic. So it looks like a nice place. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know you may get, so I'll post this video in the community. You may get some people following up with you or whatever. But thank you so much for your candor, for your time, your advice, all of that. It's just fantastic. And have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.